What is poppin', people? You got Jay Bear here, bringing you all this week's edition of Draft Notes. This is the Week 6 results, Week 7 pick'ems, so that'll also serve as your spoiler warning. If you've not seen the Shuckle Premier League Week 6 games, go ahead and do that before or get spoiled. And we also have one outstanding game from Week 5 to talk about. But with all of that being said, I would like to ask, now that we are so late into the season, if you all would be so kind as to leave a subscription. We're making it super far into the season, but there will be more draft content after this season of SPL and this season of BBR for those of you also watching, so just you wait. I just hope that you all will join me along for this ride. And in addition to that, leave a like and leave a comment letting me know what your starting playoff predictions are. Now that we're 6 weeks through the season, we're starting to get a better playoff picture. And who do you think is going to win the championship? Who do you think will meet them in finals? Who do you think is going to be the top 4 seeds and earn the buys? We got a world of Pokemon ahead of us, even though we're most of the way through the regular season. The playoffs are where the games really matter. So yeah, with that yap out of the way, we can go ahead and get into the results. Once again, spoiler warning in 3, 2, 1. Alright, and although it is not on this graphic, the first game that I want to actually talk about is going to be Moxie Boosted versus Sierra Dawn, which was outstanding last week. And that game has since been played and uploaded. Moxie uploaded a Week 5, Week 6, literally today as I am recording this. Is super late on the Wednesday night, a lot later than I normally tend to stay up, but we did get to see that game, and holy choice specs Como-O. That was kind of a goobing. Moxie was able to pick up that game in 2. I know in the first game Como-O got all 4. In the second game it was a bit closer, but the Terra Ground Iron Bundle actually being super clutch into Regieleki. After the Roaring Moon burnt Terra, it really couldn't touch the Terra Ground Bundle. So yeah, now we can get on with our regularly scheduled programming, starting off with the first game, Seabad versus Pokegame. This was a super interesting one, and in the first game, AIM almost threw to the Fluttermane by setting up Trick Room, which would have allowed the Fluttermane to die last to its own Perish Song, but he realized and reversed that Trick Room, so the Fluttermane actually ended up dying first to the Perish Song. It actually did get all 4 kills on Joey's side, but Joey was able to still keep the win regardless because of Perish Song orders. One thing that I thought was super cool here was the Leer Deoxys speed plus Choice Band Manaphy. That was something that Joey was so excited about that he actually DM'd me about in advance, how cool that tech was, and oh boy, it delivered. Game 2 was a bit more traditional. We saw Annihilate, still with the support of Leer Deoxys speed, but it was a more traditional Goober rather than a Choice Banded Manaphy, as Joey was able to pick up the set in 2. Up next, we saw Shuckle versus Nexus, a very back and forth set. In the first game, it was a pretty balanced approach. Shuckle was able to, I believe he got frozen on his Sinistcha, but that's actually not a bad Pokemon to get frozen on because it has the Machigacha, which works like Scald Thaws you out. And then Latias was ultimately able to clutch up that game. We saw our Crabominable friend again, but it was unable to do anything in the first game. Game 2 was in Nexus's favor, actually, with Iron Hands being the premier Pokemon. Nexus was able to just put in work and ended up getting 3 that game, taking us to our first Game 3 scenario of the week, where we saw Shuckle kind of revert back, or adapt actually rather, benching the Talonflame this time around. Nexus tried to, go with something a bit different because he actually benched the Torkoal in the first 2 games, tried to pull out the Sun, ended up doing well, but not quite well enough, where the Torkoal did well individually, but the game plan kind of suffered overall as Shuckle was able to pick that one up again with the help of his new trusty Latias. Up next, we saw Amel versus Shroom, and this was a super interesting set from Shroom, really highlighting Oranguru in the first game, but Amel was able to clutch up a bit with Sandy Shocks, Hoopa, Okidogi, the usual crew, but also Sandy Shock Espathra gameplay. You know, you get a little bit of gravity action. That's at least what they do theoretically. And then in the second game, we saw Amel take this one again. Oranguru wasn't quite able to go as crazy as last time, so ultimately that ended up just being a more smooth win for Amel, this time using Shaman Sky and Ursaring, actually. Amel's been enjoying Ursaring, I think, this season a bit. He's actually gotten some fairly decent results with the baby bear. Up next, we see Mountay versus Viz. This was a battle of titans. This was one that I thought could be a potential playoff series. And it started off very strong for Viz with the Eruption Entei, I believe, putting in a ton of work game one, really setting Mountay on the back foot. He was able to grab Weather Control, I believe, with a Meowstic, and just ultimately kind of straight just like autopilot through that game. Game two, Mountay's lady friend showed up, and tides seemed to go his way after that. A lot of things started coming up. Mountay, the Thunderous Incarnate, especially Terra Fairy Thundy Eye, didn't come game one, but then Mountay kind of realized that, and games 2 and games 3, it was the sort of star of the show, really bringing the Terra Fairy set, the substitute Wild Bolt, Terra Blast Protect, just kind of running through Viz's whole team, and that was because of the Iron Crown bench, which, you know, maybe come playoffs that'll be a potential bring in the second time around. Up next, we saw Tone versus Moxie, and this was the Petrarunt show. Especially game one, it was able to just get off to a pretty fast start by spreading around poison gas and clutching out an endgame next to Comfey, just constantly healing it. Game 2, Tone was able to steal it on the back of his Clawitzer, actually, and Dusknoir, kind of an unlikely duo. I believe he recently picked them up as well. But Terra Steel Clawitzer, you know, unable to be poisoned, ultimately helped Tone secure that game. And then game 3, Moxie adapted well with his Palafin, made an incredible read turn 1, Excadrill Sword Stance, it was a T-Star Excadrill lead, and Moxie just boom, wave crashed the Excadrill, and picked it up turn 1, and that really set the tone for that game. So Moxie was able to pick up the game 3, getting on a bit of a win streak. We've now talked about 2 Moxie boosted wins in this one video. Holy glaze. Alright, up next we see OG Albina versus Keely. And this was another kind of back and forth set between the dragons this time. Game 1, Owen with his Dragonite, and Scrafty actually being the main piece of Scrafty. You know, it does look pretty good into Keely's team. There was no Lando, which was a bit of an interesting thing for Owen, but it makes sense, you know, with the Dragonite and Qian Pao, kind of a tougher bring. But Serena, you know, already showing its value in the first game, as, you know, the priority blocker for something super strong like Owen's team, but Owen was ultimately able to muscle past it and take game 1. Game 2, we saw the Terra Steel Baxcalibur come out, and that's where things kind of shifted the tides for Keely. They both had Scale Shot Dragons. This time it was in favor of Keely winning it. I believe they were both actually Scale Shot Terra Steel Dragons, which was super interesting. What a fun coincidence. I love Draft League. And this time Serena was able to hold on and give Keely the win. And then in the third game, it was all Owen's Dragon, the Dragonite, and ultimately picking up that game as well with the help of Scrafty, Azumarill, Qian Pao. I believe Owen just brought the same for all 3 games. Lost game 2 and was just like, hey, I'll play better. And he actually did play better. You could notice a big increase in his plays from games 2 and game 3, really showing his level of mental adaptation while not necessarily doing any sort of physical Pokemon changes. Up next, we saw Joe versus Liv, and this was a very back and forth set again. This time, Raging Bolt being a key factor in the first game, but ultimately Gouging Fire able to, you know, lock things down. Kind of a battle of the ancient beasts. Raging Bolt, Gouging Fire was just kind of whichever one of them could dominated the games. It's kind of the pattern that we saw in the 3 games. Game 1 and Game 3 went to Liv with the Raging Bolt, and Game 2 went to Joe on the back of Gouging Fire. It was a scale shot set from that gouge. And yeah, when it was rolling game 2, things were going great. Up next, we see James versus Necra. And another incredible showing from James with his new transactions. Oh boy. The first turn of the first game was actually fantastic for Necra. The Choice Scarf, Acid Spray, Hisuian Goodra. What a fantastic tech. Next to the Miss Magius, Grass Knotting, the -2 Tinglu for the pickup kill game 1, turn 1. And that was a Choice Banded Tinglu. It had an incredibly solid matchup. And we were actually able to see that in game 2 from James, but game 1 it was a weird Sword Stance Shaman. James has really kind of leveled up his prep. It's been super incredible watching him, dive into the draft scene. He's gotten so deep in it. He's just like deep in his bag. He's not even like bringing the Dondozo tattoo here. He's not even like bringing fat like full Glamora Tinglu stall. He's innovating, and it's been incredible to watch. Up next, our 9th game of the week, we see Cloverbells taking on Cybertron, the Battle of the Ursalunas, and ultimately it was Clover's Ursaluna that could come out on top with the support of his unlikely ally Scraggy. Not Scrafty, you heard me right, Scraggy. And ultimately the Scraggy, Ursaluna, Blood Moon, and Glastrier able to really rumble in the Trick Room, outputted such hard damage even through like a bulky Cresselia, and ultimately that was able to win the game for Clover. We actually didn't really get to see the biggest Ursaluna battle. It was kind of just a pretty one-sided affair, which I think that, it makes somewhat sense here with the special offense being really, really hard for Aaron to really shut down. He's got a lot of good support for physical offense with his double intimidators and the Wo-Chien, but not as much for special offense. And in our final game of the week, we actually now have no winless coaches here. I was able to pick up her first win on the back of Chiyu. Chiyu went crazy that first game. We saw some good plays from that and his Zoroark, disguising it well, but ultimately the Chiyu was just too strong to overcome. It was hitting all of its moves, and when Chiyu is hitting its moves, it's really, really hard to stop. So that was our review for the week. We're now sitting at 39-21 in pick'ems, roughly a 65% win, actually exactly a 65% win rate. Would you look at that? Which is pretty good. We're above 60%. I originally set the goal for 2/3. And we definitely are within range, and one more correct pick'em will get us to the 50% mark guaranteed, even if we lost every game other than that one in week 7 and every game in week 8, we'd at least have 50%. But we'll see if I continue the pick'ems for playoffs. I probably will, but I think I've gotten a pretty good grasp on how our coaches are operating with their teams, and that's helped me tremendously with the pick'ems. But yeah, we can move on to our first pick'em of the week, being Seabad versus Amel, and a bunch of teams made transactions. So the deadline for transactions was at the end of week 6 to go into effect week 7, and we saw so many coaches partaking in these end of season transactions. I want to say like 5 or 6 teams are gonna look a little bit different. Starting with Seabad's, you can actually see Seabad has Garchomp now, which originally came from Liv's team. So there were also a couple of coach-to-coach trades. And yeah, now you can see, I like Seabad's new look team a little bit better. He had like kind of a couple of different iterations, but I like the new team, and especially this Alolan Muck. It looks poised to have a fantastic matchup from day 1. You look at its damage output into like Hoopa, it'll chew a lot of hits. Indeedee, it's great. Okidogi, it's a dark type that's not weak to fighting. So there's a lot that you can do. And Seabad has some pretty good answers if like you want it to be like a Terra Ground Hoopa or something like that with, Gyarados looks pretty solid. Fluttermane always just does good damage. I almost highlighted the Fluttermane. If you look at Amel's team, there's no Fairy Resist, so maybe I should have just highlighted Fluttermane. I wanted to get a little bit creative and also shout out the new member in the Alolan Muck though. But no Fairy Resist into the Fluttermane. You can expect potentially like a Choice Specs, Fairy Feather, booster energy type of set, but ultimately I think Fluttermane will do super well, and I think the bulk of the Alolan Muck here will be super nice. We can see how degenerate Seabad wants to get if he wants to go full minimize mode, or if he'll just, use a solid like Assault Vest set. I think looks really, really solid. And then on Amel's side, I really wanted to shout out this Sandy Shocks. If you look at it, the Earth Power, Thunderbolt, if you go like Terra Ice, you're just nuking the Garchomp. Or you could go like Terra Ground, looks pretty solid as well. Seabad's team, not the best into ground offense. Torterra technically resists your Dual Stab, so you could just go Terra Ice and threaten it a lot. You have like something like Flash Cannon for Fluttermane, which is pretty nice, and Clefairy as well, which I think is another very solid piece here. I could also see like a manual like Misty Terrain I believe Fluttermane would get. Maybe I'm wrong, don't quote me on that. But to overwrite the Psychic Terrain, I don't necessarily think that Seabad necessarily minds the Psychic Terrain too much though. Just gotta be, mindful of Expanding Force. But ultimately, I just, I think that there's a few more things I could talk about on Amel's team. I think the Hoopa, it'll probably take a non-traditional route. But, knockoff, just being like a bulky knockoff user here looks pretty nice. Indeedee looks solid as well. You just got to use the Sandy Shocks to get through the Alolan Muck. I think something that could be interesting even would be leaning on something like Houndstone as well to kind of overload that Alolan Muck, and then potentially like end game with Last Respects could be really, really cool. I do have Amel winning this one. I really just like the Sandy Shocks matchup, and I think he has between Indeedee support, Shaman for Tailwind, plenty of different ways to kind of get around it. However, I would not be surprised at all if Fluttermane and the Alolan Muck really carry Seabad to a victory here, but I am going to go with my guy Amel to win this one. Up next, we see Nexus versus Viz. And now Viz is kind of going to have to take a 180 mindset. He was trying to stop Rain last week, now he's trying to stop Sun this week. I think it's super interesting though, because they both kind of have Trick Room elements to their team, but Nexus kind of gets slower into the Trick Room, and he also kind of gets faster outside of it. I think that Porygon 2 potentially has a very solid role here. You gotta, with Clefable, that redirection looks really, really good. You kind of have to be mindful of Urshifu plus Iron Crown, right? That's kind of, that's the bread and butter right there. That's what they're exactly supposed to be doing, so kind of makes sense. It's always going to be nearly unguardable. But one guy I really like here is the Torkoal. I think not only just it being the Sunsetter, but also the fire resistances aren't great. It's, Dragapult, Entei, and Araquanid. Araquanid could be pretty good, but there's always the Iron Hands to really annoy it, and I think Iron Hands also looks fantastic here with either a Psychic Berry or a Assault Vest Iron Hands. Both of them look really, really solid here. On Viz's side, and then the last guy I want to shout out was Walking Wake, because even if Viz tries to change the weather with his Meowstic, Walking Wake looks really, really solid here. But on Viz's side, I do want to shout out the Araquanid. I think that it looks really solid outside of Iron Hands. This guy looks incredible. You can, if you switch the weather to Rain, Liquidation goes really, really hard. I don't really think you need too much more outside of that. You'll have a bug move for the Lilligant, probably, maybe a Terra Blast type. But other than that, you kind of just, you can piece Araquanid into this team. The Meowstic looks like a super interesting guy here. I mentioned it last week to combat the Sun, or to combat the Rain with Sun. This time you can combat the Sun with Rain. There's a couple of different ways you can take it. I think Dragapult also looks super solid here. Something like Dragon Darts just kind of goes crazy, especially if you do reset the weather. Then you're able to, be faster than Lilligant again and get going. Ultimately, I do like Viz's matchup here. I think the Rain was a bit harder for him than the Sun will be, and I predict him to get a win here. Up next, we see Joey versus Moxie. Moxie's on a bit of a win streak. Joey is also having an incredible season himself. So who do I want to shout out here? Looking like Annihilate. I think something like Terra Poison Annihilate specifically goes really, really hard here. Terra Poison, now you're immune to a lot of what Petra wants to throw at you. You can kind of ignore that guy. You're really just waiting Arcanine from doing a lot here because of the Intimidate stuff. And you'll be so fat that you probably can shrug off bundle hits. You'll Drain Punch back health from the Palafin. And it just looks very, very challenging to beat. especially if you bring like a good way to support it, either with like Screen's Deoxys or with potentially like Bronzong. You could even try to go for like super slow Annihilate and Trick Room, although I don't necessarily know how real that is. But also I think Bronzong is really, really nice for damage into Comfey, which you kind of otherwise lack here. I think that looks pretty solid. I think the Hydrapple also looks really good here. Just Fickle Beam plus like Earth Power or Body Press for King Gambit. Both like looks like a pretty solid set. And then you just kind of got to worry about Comfey. And also if you're Terra Poison and Annihilape, you don't really got to worry about Comfey too much. I think that's just a pretty good set for Joey. On Moxie's side, I wanted to shout out Abomasnow. I think the offense looks good, but I also think Aurora Veil looks really, really nice here, potentially. Although Iron Bundle could be setting it for the Abomasnow to just click Blizzard, Giga Drain, and then rely on its partner Petrant and King Gambit to get through the Bronzong and just kind of pick up a lot of the rest of the team on its own. I think the Abomasnow itself looks really scary here. Having just, grass coverage for the mana fee, and then if the team can handle Bronzong, there's not really any ice resists, so I think that can be really, really potent for Moxie, and so ultimately I think that's a really good avenue for him to win, but I just don't really see the Poison and Annihilate counterplay enough for me to pick against it, so I will pick Joey to win this one. Up next we see Keely versus Shuckle King. And oh boy, the Urshifu Rapid Strike matchup here looks incredible. It's also a Prankster Tailwind matchup, but one thing that's super important is, usually in these like Prankster matchups, it's very interesting because they have to be worried about like Prankster Taunt as well. But the Talonflame doesn't have Prankster Taunt; it only has priority on the Tailwind. So something like Mental Herb Torn, kind of real, but you don't necessarily need to worry as much. Something like however, something just but that also might work in your favor, because then if it was actually priority, Serena could block it. It's just a bit of an interesting, trade-off here. And speaking of Serena blocking it, kind of does just make it hard to click flying moves early game. But I think the Urshifu can more than make up for it. Water plus fighting, outside of Skiploom, and let's be honest, it's a Skiploom. I've seen Keely bring it before, but I just don't really trust it into this matchup at all. I think that it's just, I wouldn't say unbringable, but pretty close to it, So outside of that, you're looking really good. You have Aqua Jet for potential Arcanines. Just got to be mindful of Serena. But just like Mystic Water, I think looks really, really solid and just very well positioned. I think Latias is also great, especially to support it with Icy Winds or Thunder Waves. You really can do a lot, and Latias also is one of the best natural answers to Landorus Incarnate on the field. Also pretty good naturally into Quackleval. You just kind of got to be worried about the backs, which naturally Urshifu takes care of pretty well. So yeah, I think that it's a great approach from Shuckle's side. On Keely's side, there's not a whole lot of Sylveon resistances. This is where I wish that there was like a bit more of a Trick Room element to this team, because Sylveon and Trick Room would be really, really good here. You just have to worry about Orthworm, but I don't really think Shuckle's relied on his Orthworm too much this season. That being said, I think this is a pretty good place where you'd want to rely on it. So, because that's also pretty good into the Land OI if there's no Focus Blast, and if you're running Focus Blast for Orthworm, that's a interesting bring. I wouldn't say it's bad. You got to cover your opponent's team, but if an Orthworm's forcing Focus Blast on the Land OI, maybe it is kind of winning. So I really think that Sylveon's offense here is good, and it's also, can be bulky enough if you spec it out pretty physically defensive. Give it like a Citrus Berry to better lift Surging Strikes, and you can just be clicking Hyper Voices pretty hard here, especially if you can find a way to, deny Talonflame Tailwind, which you can potentially do with like an Arcanine Extreme Speed, knock it off of Prankster. But then like if you're Arcanine Extreme Speed plus Torn, kind of hard, because then you're not with Sylveon, so it's a bit of a challenging sequence to execute to really enable the Sylveon, but I think that it has so much potential here that I couldn't necessarily not highlight it. That being said, I do think Shuckle's path to victory is a little bit easier, so I will be going with Shuckle King to win this week. Halfway through our matchup oversight, we see Shroom Reaver versus Liv, and oh boy, Liv made a few transactions like we highlighted, because that Garchomp's now on Seabat's team. We actually see her with the Crocodile and Metagross, and I really do like a lot of what Metagross is bringing here. You'll actually see in a moment that's kind of who I'm featuring, but I think that this Iron Valiant is probably one of Shroom's best way to win. With a booster speed, you'll be faster than anything that isn't Choice Scarf Torn. And then Moonblast, Thunderbolt looks really good into the team. You can tech on a few other, nice tools. Something like coaching, maybe. I don't necessarily know who you'd want to coach, but you don't really need Wide Guard for things. But I just think, good old singles player in me sees Iron Valiant, and I think the offensive button is probably strong enough here to push things across. I think the Booster Energy plus Oranguru pass it a Life Orb with Symbiosis, and you're cooking. Maybe that's a bit greedy, but I think Terra Electric actually has a good niche here, resisting Liv's best priority, and also getting a super strong Thunderbolt for the Volcanion and Torn. I think those are both great options here. So I think the Val is pretty good. But outside of that, I don't really like a lot of the matchups here, specifically just because of Volcanion just kind of bullying a lot of this team. I think that it's so good here, but I wanted to highlight the new pickup Metagross just because it's a new pickup here. So I'm a little bit biased towards it, but just like Heavy Slam, Bullet Punch, Psychic Fangs, you're golden. You need a little bit of something for Duraludon, but the rest of the team is pretty well positioned to kind of bully a Duraludon if it decides to show up, so I'm not too worried about that. But I also think Volcanion looks great here with water, fire, and poison coverage, along with what the rest of the team does to Hydreigon. You're in a really, really good spot, and along with what the rest of the team does to Noivern, like Volcanion, Ninetales, super good here, I think, as well. So it's going to be hard for me to pick against Liv just because of the different variety of modes that she has. And I haven't really even touched on, like the Vivian and Crocodile potentially to go a little bit bulkier with, Crocodile, Intimidate, Vivian, Friend Guard, and on top of that, the rest of the bulky offense. I like the new changes that Liv has made to her team, and I like the matchup here quite a lot, so I will be picking Liv to win this one. Alrighty, and now moving on to the next matchup, we see Mountay versus Necra. And again, we see some fresh transactions. I believe these are new. We see the Sableye on Necra's side, along with, I believe, Heatran's new face. I want to say those are the two new faces. And then on Mountay's side, he is rocking out with the same team. He's locked in, which I think is fair. And I think that Archaludon looks super good here. I think Draco Meteor looks like a really, really good move to click. You have potential, ground coverage for the Heatran, but let's be real. It's a rain team. You're not really worried about killing the Heatran with your Archaludon. You can also body press it. So I'm not necessarily too worried about Heatran kind of being a struggle here. I think something like not even being like stamina, I think being like a potential, stalwart set could be really cool here with like a Power Herb Electroshock, kind of call back a little bit to Regulation H, just because I do think Sableye actually has a little bit of potential to turn off your weather here. And I think that could be cool. You could even spec on like Rock Slide for Volcarona. You've got plenty of options with this thing. So I'm really interested to see if Mountay wants to, do a little bit something creative with this Archaludon. I think this is a great week to do so. I think he's very, very poised to potentially go crazy with it. And then on Necra's side, I really want to highlight the Sableye. I think that it does have a lot of very useful tools into this matchup. It can change the weather. It can be Fake Out here. I think Fake Out's pretty nice. It can be some Encore. It can be Screens. It does a lot. I'm very glad that it's here over Klefki now. I think that it fits this team quite well. And then offensively, this is where kind of I think the matchup falls a little bit short, is the offensive side of things. I think Goodra potentially looks good. Ogerpon does look good, but it's kind of too slow. Sorry, I'm almost yawning. I'm so tired. It's late, but the urge to record and get it out on time. I have time. I just, I wanted to get it done, but this kind of just seems like a challenging matchup. You're relying on like Pawmot as well, and whenever you're relying on Pawmot, I'm just kind of a little bit uncomfortable, and that's why I do lean Mountay in this one. All right, 4 more matchups. Up next, we see Tone versus Aaron, And this was a week where we got to see a couple of Tone's different transactions come through last week. And this week we see Aaron's transactions hitting the table, kept the top 5, switched out. I believe he used to have 5, now he has 4. Maybe, no, he always had 4. I think he was always a 9-man team. But I like a lot of those switches. But for now, I'm going to highlight this Dusknoir. It came last week, and I think it's poised to do a lot of work again. Your Excadrill, I think, is very well positioned into like Spectrier and Grimmsnarl, which would otherwise give this guy a little bit of a hard time. And Mienshao is also really nice for like Meowscarada, which can otherwise give this thing a hard time. Or you can just like Terra. But I think like getting this guy in Trick Room potentially, if you have to fight in Trick Room, Dusknoir is not the worst Pokemon to do it with. You got like Poltergeist and Leech Life, and you're doing pretty well. And then like something for Ursaluna, or you're immune to Facade as well. You could even potentially, it's kind of hard to preserve an Air Balloon in this match. I say you can be Air Balloon, but kind of challenging. I think that it's a bit of an interesting mon. I kind of just wanted to go a little bit, out of the box for this one, because I think that's kind of how Tone has to approach this match. I think if he plays straightforward, Aaron will just kind of pick him up with his either Super Trick Room mode, or I really like the new Fast mode with the additions of Meowscarada, Keldeo, and Staraptor. And speaking of Keldeo, was once on Tone's team. Now I think it's out for revenge. I really like the Keldeo matchup here. Between like Water Fighting and Icy Wind, you're really covered on this team, and you're getting through it pretty quickly. I guess the main downside to the Keldeo is that you're not really hitting Ments too hard unless it's Icy Wind, and Icy Wind's like probably still not doing a ton. You're probably not OHKOing the Ments, so I think that's a bit of a challenge. But outside of that, it looks like you're pretty good. And then you're kind of also slower than Kilowattrel and Ogerpon, so maybe you need to get a little bit of speed control into it to get the Keldeo to work. But I think that it has enough application here, and just because of this narrative of the rematch, or I guess revenge game, I wanted to highlight it here. But I think it actually does have merit. I'm just highlighting it to highlight it, Up next, Owen versus Sierra. I'm really interested. I think this is going to be an interesting battle of fighting types, kind of mid-tier fighting types at that. Starting with the Scrafty, I think it has a lot of bulk, unless Sierra really specs Play Rough onto the Ogerpon specifically for the Scrafty. And I think the Ogerpon's kind of strapped for slots. Maybe you have it to also hit Dragonite, but I think the Scrafty is very well positioned with like an Assault Vest set. You can be clicking like knockoffs and Drain Punches, maybe even like Low Kick for doing extra damage to the Moon. You can be clicking like Fire Punch or something for Corviknight, or Thunder Punch to also hit Ogerpon post Terra. I think it has a lot of good application here with the Scrafty. You could also be Fake Out. I'm just a bit wary of that into the Psychic Terrain from the Indeedee. And on Sierra's side, we see Gallade, I think. Looks super good here. Just the damage that it can deal with like Sacred Sword, and it can also be annoying with like the Trick Room call. I think that the Trick Room mode is very strong here, potentially with like a min speed Gallade and a very slow Indeedee. I think can do a lot of work. The other thing I wanted to shout out potentially was Chi-Yu Dash Bun. I think is kind of real. You really like Scarf, Lava Plume, Chi-Yu. Owen really has a lot of Pokemon that he's risking a burn on, and then the Dash Bun just gets +2 defense and becomes very, very challenging to kill. I think that's another mode for Sierra. But I think Owen can kind of just play somewhat straightforward with his Gen-Pow. There's really not good ice resists here. I feel like I've highlighted that on Sierra's team a few times. And you can just kind of play straightforward. I think Dragonite with like a Scale Shot set looks pretty good. You just kind of have to watch out for Corviknight, but like Magmar and Thundurus kind of make Corviknight a bit challenging. So ultimately, I think that Owen has enough tools to win this one. Up next, we see Joe versus That's a +1, and I think that this is going to be a game won and lost by the Claw. Actually, I don't really think you need to use Dire Claw that much, but I think that the Sneasler here looks super good. The only mon that it really struggles with is the Jirachi, and you have Gouging Fire for that. But other than that, Dire Claw looks super good. You're faster than Wims naturally. You'll live like a Weavile hit and be able to knock it out. Zoroark potentially is always waiting in the wings, which can make it a little bit challenging, but ultimately I don't think it's that bad. I think Joe also made, a couple of nice transactions here, namely dropping Raikou for Electabuzz. Having the Follow Me support I think will be super clutch this matchup. and ultimately help him out a lot in positioning a potential Gouging Fire endgame. I think he's really used the Gouging Fire well, and I would look to see a potential Gouging Fire sweep later on in this set as well. On that side, I really think the Whimsicott's super good here, especially just clicking Encore into like a lot of what Joe's trying to do with his more slow, methodical team. Clicking the Encore can be super nice. Getting the Tailwind speed controls are great, because you can probably rumble in the Trick Room, but I think just having Tailwind's good. And just the support of what it can do, I think using like Charm potentially to lower the physical attack of a lot of the annoying Pokemon on Joe's side is very real. And I'm curious to see how that really approaches this one, because I do think that the matchup does favor Joe quite a bit. Just the offensive matchup looks really solid. And yeah, I'm curious to see how he approaches it, but I do have Joe picked for this one. And then our final match of the week, we see James versus Clover, and the one that I wanted to shout out was Tatsugiri on James' side. I feel like he's gone somewhat crazy with the Tatsu, and I think that again it has plenty of potential to put in an insane win here, with just how much the damage it puts out. The fire resist on Clover's side aren't great, especially when you consider they could also potentially have to take like a Draco Meteor. And I think the Storm Drain is super nice for someone like Tinglu as well. Although Tinglu's a bit tough just because of like Great Tusk and Brute Bonnet, but like a Terra Tinglu, you can potentially get around that. Then you don't necessarily need the Storm Drain as much. But I just really like the offensive water matchup. And instead of highlighting the Dondozo, all boringly, I'm gonna highlight Tatsugiri. And then on Clover's side, I really like the Rotom Wash and what it can do here. I think that it has a lot of potential. Just with its stabs, I think a more offensive set goes really, really hard. And you kind of punish Shaman quite well with, Typhlosion and Murkrow mode. I do think Shaman has a lot of potential here as well, but I think in Trick Room and out of Trick Room, you can punish it quite well. So I think the Rotom gets opened up a ton. And so for all of that, I do think that James just has it a bit easier. I think Dondozo's a bit hard, into Murkrow, but I don't think you necessarily need to do Dondozo things. I think you just kind of use your water type offense and potentially just, beat the sun. Or you can potentially like go Tailwind mode on him and just go crazy. Then you just have to be mindful of the Trick Room, but even in Trick Room, you're fine. So yeah, I think that James has a lot of resiliency here, and I will be picking him to win this one. Oh wow, I've been recording for a while. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Draft Notes. We've got one more true regular season episode after this, and then it's playoff predictions. So yeah, let me know who you're seeing in the playoffs. I think anyone is still theoretically able to make it. So it'll be a bit of an interesting one to see who will be in that top 12, who will be in that top 4 for a bye. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoy. And with all that being said, until next time, J Bear out. Peace.